Live from Nairobi, this is Focus on Africa on BBC News. Our stories today. Nearly 60,000 people have been displaced by heavy fighting in northern Mozambique over the last 2 weeks, with more than half of that number being children.
Communities are being assisted, but assistance required more and more. We cannot say stop it to help now.
And here in Kenya, the government is to compensate victims of past demonstrations and recent protests that turned deadly. Will this guarantee justice for the affected?
I usually feel bad, especially when I imagine I was shot, even though I wasn't in the protests. I was at my place of work.
And also coming up in the program, African countries must reassess their health priorities in response to recent funding cuts. The new World Health Organization Africa head tells the BBC in an exclusive interview.
Africa is going to be independent. It's going to choose its priorities.
You're watching Focus on Africa. Thanks for your time. I'm Wahiga Mwaura. Well, let's begin in Mozambique, where more than 30,000 children have fled the northern Cabo Delgado province over the last 2 weeks. Now, humanitarian organizations are saying that this is one of the highest number of people to be uprooted in such a short time that they have documented. Well, on Tuesday this week, the International Organization of Migration said that more than 57,000 people have been displaced since July this year. Planning is now underway to beef up assistance in the coming days. But cuts to international aid by the US and other countries will have an impact on the support needed. Chuire, one of the 16 districts in Cabo Delgado province, was the hardest hit. Reports indicate that a high number of unaccompanied or separated children are on the move without documentation. Humanitarian organizations say these would make it difficult for them to safely access basic services and maintain their livelihoods. Well, since 2017, thousands of people have been killed and hundreds of thousands displaced in Cabo Delgado province, where jihadist insurgents have launched attacks against government forces and civilians. Now, earlier on, I spoke to Valige Tuabo, who's the governor of the province of Cabo Delgado. I first asked him for the latest updates regarding the security situation there.
Comparing with what happened in 2022 as well, where we saw a lot of communities moving from the north of the province and the center of the province to the south. Then again from 23, they started returning to their villages. For these days, the situation is almost different. People has been displaced in their village, but they did not move from their district. In this case, we are talking about Shihuri, where all those communities are concentrating.
We want to understand the situation regarding children. They've been adversely affected by this. How are you and the national government prioritizing their safety and security?
It's one of our priority. The terrorists, they are taking disadvantage just for them to be covered and taking the kids in the distance of 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers, till where they think that now they are safe, and then they release. The schools gets closed, and some other moments we see the schools being put in fire.
How many people have been displaced as a result of these latest attacks, and what do they need most at the moment?
There is a need of humanitarian assistance. The communities are being assisted, but the assistance required more and more. We cannot say stop it to help now.
Have you requested for more soldiers and more support from elsewhere?
By the way, how things are being controlled, and we do believe and we have hope of that probably in coming days can be well controlled.
Why should the people of Cabo Delgado trust you, Governor, when you promise them peace, but right now so many of them are displaced?
We never said that it has ended. We used to say that it's being controlled, and we have also to continue vigilant, and also it's not a matter of being trusted. It's a matter of the time when we feel that we are in good environment to enjoy that environment and to request more vigilance and to request the communities to help our forces.
There are those who say that to bring lasting peace in Cabo Delgado, it's not just about using the military, but also about ensuring that the resources of Cabo Delgado are enjoyed by the entire community.
I do not have yet scientific or research which has been done clear. Yeah, so I can't answer clear about that in this moment.
Elsewhere, Kenya's President William Ruto has set up a team to compensate victims of demonstrations and protests held since 2017. Now, this initiative is aimed at providing reparations for civilians and security personnel who suffered bodily harm or lost their lives during protests and riots. Now, the team has 4 months to come up with a way of how victims will be compensated. Well, someone who might benefit from this compensation is Brian Mwangi, a casual laborer who was shot by police during Kenya's 2024 Gen Z protests, even though he wasn't part of the protests. The bullet left him paralyzed from the chest down. Now, 10 months on, his family is still dealing with the mental and financial effects.
I usually feel bad, especially when I imagine I was shot, even though I wasn't in the protests. I was at my place of work.
Kenya has seen a wave of Gen Z-led protests. What started as anger over tax hikes grew into a broader movement calling for change. But the cost of that uprising has been heavy. On 8th August 2024, youth in Brian's hometown Karatina joined nationwide protests. This is the day Brian's life changed.
I was in town. I was fixing a tire. I also washed a car. At around 2 p.m., I was just watching the protests. People were burning tires on the road. Then they all gathered near a petrol station where I was working at the time. I was shot in the back and broke my spine. So I was left paralyzed from the chest going down.
It took 10 months to remove the bullet from his back, as he had developed severe bed sores that needed to be treated first.
That gunshot caused me so much harm because if I want to go to the toilet, I have to use diapers. I use a urine bag because I can't feel when I am urinating. I can't feel when I'm having a bowel movement.
A total orphan, his aunt became his full-time caregiver.
Brian
still has a wound in the back, which has not healed completely. And that still comes to dress the wound. We have so many challenges. We don't have money. I don't have a job. The catheter usually comes off when we are at home, and so when it does, we get stressed.
She worries about the future and whether Brian can rebuild his life.
I just want Brian to get justice. Even for his treatment, I'd like him to get proper medical care so that he can at least support himself.
Brian's family says the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, IPOA, knows about his case but hasn't taken action. The BBC contacted IPOA about Brian's case. In a statement, they said that investigations are ongoing.
The inability to work, to go places, these issues of diapers, catheters, depending on people, makes me feel bad. I just have to accept because the damage has already happened. It pains me, but I just have to accept myself.
Despite everything, Brian still believes young people must speak up.
If protesting is the only way to be heard, then I don't see a problem with it. You can't keep quiet while being oppressed.
Well, in that report, Brian spoke to the BBC's Anita Nkonge. And let's now get further context on the latest developments around this with the Executive Director of Amnesty International in Kenya, Irungu Houghton, who joins us now. Irungu, thank you for your time on this. I mean, just thinking about Brian's story there again, this happened back in 2024. It's taken over a year now for Kenya's government to announce some sort of compensation framework. Why did it take so long is the question many would ask this evening.
It's difficult to answer that question. I mean, I think as Amnesty International with the Police Reforms Working Group, there's probably been about 10 calls that we've made going as far back as 2017, that all peaceful protesters and bystanders that have been killed by police officers, not only require justice, but they do require some form of reparation, some form of restorative justice. From our records, about 300 protesters have been killed by police officers since the post-election violence of 2017. And for very, very many of them, not just Brian Mwangi, but for very many of them, including those who have died and, most Kenyans have forgotten their names, justice is yet to begin in our courts. So in many ways, I think what we've seen is a culture of impunity that has allowed for the constant waves of violence during the protests that we saw over 2023, 24, and of course this year.
And of course, this is part of what you and other civil society players and other Kenyans have been demanding or asking for. But is it enough? What else would you like to see done in regards to sort of closure around some of the incidents that happened around these protests?
Yeah. Well, we've received news of a compensation fund and a panel to dispense with this ugly chapter in Kenya's history with a level of cautious optimism. Because over the last 8 years, it's really been left to human rights organizations and active citizens, most notably Hanifa Adam, that have been able to support families with, just this horrible scenario of both emotional and financial pain as they struggle to pay for hospital care, mortuary bills, burial costs, and the legal battles that come with it. So we've basically been arguing that if this compensation is to be meaningful, it must go beyond money. It must not also prevent families from seeking prosecution of those officers that shot their loved ones. It must be based within a concept of victim-centered reparations. It must restore justice, and it must prevent future violence. That's all that's required. It cannot be a public relations stunt or an offer of blood money for silence. The funding must be carefully administered, it must be fair, it must be fast, and it must be transparent. Anything less than this, and I think we will see a double tragedy unfolding in Kenya.
Irungu, already we've seen attempts by some to move to court. Some police officers have been arraigned in court as well. Is that a sign that the police reforms that have been talked about by the Kenyan government, there's some steps forward in regards to that, or are there still bottlenecks?
I wouldn't, as Amnesty International, we wouldn't use the very few cases that are in our courts as examples of, access to justice, access to, the presence of human rights-based policing. In many cases, many of the cases have not gone full trial yet. Some of them are still at an inquest stage. Others have, are kind of rolling through our courts. But we've not seen, for example, any convictions as we speak, for the violence we saw in 2023, or even for that matter, the violence we saw last year. And what's most worrying about this is that the violence during protests by police officers seems to be getting even more, brutal, as we saw on July the 7th, where we had 43 people killed within 6 hours, and that's almost two-thirds of the number of people we saw killed during the protests of 2024.
Okay. Irungu Houghton, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we'll be discussing this in the coming days as this compensation framework is rolled out. Thank you for joining us on the program, the Executive Director there of Amnesty International. Well, you are watching Focus on Africa. Still to come on the program, Rwanda will host Cycling's Road Race World Championships. The very first time the event will be held in Africa. We meet an all-female cycling team and hear how the sport has changed lives. Welcome back. This is Focus on Africa. Now, African countries are being urged to reassess their health priorities in response to recent funding cuts by the United States and other development partners. Dr. Mohamed Yacoub Janabi, the African regional head of the World Health Organization, told the BBC that while the transition will be challenging, the reduction in funding presents an opportunity for African countries to assert their independence and set their own priorities. Now, in an exclusive interview with the BBC's Thomas Nadi in Accra, Dr. Janabi expressed concern about the impact of the aid cuts on WHO's work and the need for innovative solutions to bridge this funding gap.
The reduction in humanitarian assistance has put many African countries on edge. The US and other development partners have cut aid, which has specifically affected the health sector.
The global WHO, we lost almost 35%. We're talking about a deficit of about 1.5 billion. So even when we cut our total general by 14%, we ended up having about 4.27 billion.
As a result of the funding cuts, Africa is currently experiencing a 70% drop in development assistance, which has the potential to roll back progress made in tackling HIV/AIDS, maternal mortality, and child health. But Dr. Janabi says it also presents a unique opportunity to Africa.
If you look on positive, Africa is going to be independent. It's going to choose its priorities. It's going to decide what it wants out of the healthcare. The transition is going to be difficult. I shouldn't say until we adapt. The governments take the leads by increasing their budgets, by improvising universal health coverage, the insurance thing, new ways of thinking out of the traditional donors with innovative thinking, how debt swapped.
A lot of countries are struggling. For instance, it's only Botswana and Rwanda who have been able to meet the 15% Abuja Declaration target of dedicating a percentage of their national budget to health. And many countries, economies are struggling, people are overburdened with taxes. How do you expect them to still be able to raise enough revenue to deal with their health problems?
What you're saying is true, and we are encouraging countries, member states, to revisit their priorities. And there are many ways which they can try to improvise and see, because We've been encouraging now taxation of tobacco, taxation on alcohol. The sugary stuff still is a debate. There are some countries who have gone to road tax. Every liter of fuel you buy, whether it's 10 cents, whether it's 5 cents, when you put it cumulative, we have to come up with innovative ways of raising funds.
How long is it going to take African countries to be able to overcome the funding deficit?
I think it's a difficult question, that how long will it take? Because one, the economic capacity, we have got 47 countries, and different countries got different economical power, and not only depends on economical power, but political decisions also. It's very important. And a living example here, I'll just cite one as an example. I look at Rwanda. Because of the political will, they've managed pretty well, so maybe they might go faster.
The WHO has warned that conflicts could increase the spread of diseases across the continent, while drug resistance poses a major challenge in the coming years.
And now time for some sport. Rwanda will host cycling's Road Race World Championships this year, the first time the event will be held on the African continent. Well, the country has seen growing interest in the sport, including among women who are pushing back against traditional expectations by getting into competitive cycling. While critics claim that the event is a soft power strategy to deflect from Rwanda's alleged involvement in the conflict in the neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo and its human rights record, the government and organizers firmly reject such accusations, pointing to Rwanda's strong cycling tradition and sports power to bring people together. BBC Sport Africa's Kelvin Kimadi has been speaking to 21-year-old Olivia, who turned her life around in competitive cycling.
Life on two wheels. For Olivia Maniragena, it has always meant a level of freedom.
I learned how to ride a bike when I was 7 years old. It at one time helped me to take care of my family, like fetching water, firewood, buying different things, and as a means of transport.
But that freedom was put at risk when Olivia was orphaned aged 14 and became a mother at 15. By the time she was 17, she was left on her own, caring for 2 children and 3 siblings. Now 21, her decision to join Bike for Future, an all-female cycling team, has put her back in control.
Love of my cycling takes away my anxiety, depression, and it brings me happiness.
At the Project Cycling Center in Bugesera, Olivia hasn't honed just her racing skills. She's now a proficient bike mechanic as well.
I can dismantle the bike and then bring it together in 5 minutes. It is something I value so much, and it has brought me hope to life, something that I had lost.
While other members of the 30-strong team have learned skills like welding and tailoring, Olivia's choice of trade has allowed her to fix her financial issues.
What gives me strength to keep on moving and keep on pushing is that at least I am able to get income. On a good day when I work from the bike shop, I can get $7 per day.
Olivia can earn even more when she races competitively. It's all part of the plan to empower women and young girls.
The way how we do it is by bringing to the attention of community members and elders, parents, that girls are also able to do what men can do, giving girls the opportunity to get into business areas where boys predominantly engage.
The project, which has distributed over 100 recycled bikes from abroad, was launched to coincide with Rwanda becoming the first African nation to host the Cycling Road Race World Championships. Organizers have dismissed claims that the event is a soft power move to deflect attention from Rwanda's alleged support for rebels in neighboring DRC. While the Rwandan government has also rejected claims that it uses sport to distract from a poor human rights record. Organizers, the UCI, have talked of sports power to bring people together and say that the inclusion of a standalone women's under-23 race for the first time in the event's history also reflects their commitment to gender equality.
Now there is a much more belief among other young girls and women that it's definitely possible to improve the status of vulnerable girls through the power of bicycles.
While the road to the top remains difficult, the determination of cyclists like Olivia reflects the growing opportunities for women in sport in Rwanda. Kevin Kimathi, BBC News, Kigali.
Well, it's also time for me to ride out of here into the weekend. But remember, you can get in touch with me then and let me know what some of your thoughts are regarding the program. I'm at Wahiga Mwaura on X. But that's it for today's program. Stay safe this weekend. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
My dad was a farmer, but he also had a radio talk show for farmers who called in with their farming problems. He'd patiently listen to every conflicting account of what was and wasn't working. That was really influential to how I approached my journalism. Building trust by taking the time to understand a situation clearly before reporting a story. In a 24-hour news cycle, patience can be so frustrating, but it's a crucial tool. I'm Lucy Hawkins on BBC News Now.
It's 6 p.m. in London. This is The World Today with Anita McVeigh. International condemnation grows over Israel's plan to launch a military takeover of Gaza City. We speak to one Gaza resident about the mood on the ground. World leaders respond. The UK Prime Minister calls on Benjamin Netanyahu to reconsider immediately as Germany halts military exports to Israel. The war in Ukraine, Donald Trump's deadline for Russia to agree to a ceasefire arrives, but there's doubt over whether he'll hit Russia with sanctions as promised. And also coming up on The World Today, a rogue recipe for an Italian classic prompts pasta purists to complain to the British Embassy in Rome. We'll have two chefs on to sort out the spaghetti spat. And Bristol residents celebrate the annual International Balloon Fiesta. Welcome to The World Today, an hour of international news from the BBC. We start with widespread international condemnation after Israel's decision to escalate the war with Hamas with a plan for the military to take over Gaza City. Germany, one of the largest suppliers of arms to Israel, says it's stopping the export of weapons that could be used in Gaza. And the UK Prime Minister says Israel's decision is wrong. We'll have more on that reaction a little later. And in the last few minutes, the UN Secretary General says he is gravely alarmed by Israel's move, describing it as a dangerous escalation. But let's turn for a moment to what we know so far about Israel's plan. Benjamin Netanyahu's office says the military will prepare to take control of Gaza City. We don't know exactly when that will begin, but our correspondents say this is likely the first phase of a full takeover of the Gaza Strip, which could take months. Before the Israeli cabinet meeting where the plan was approved, the Israeli Prime Minister said he wants Israel to control all of Gaza, but does not want to keep it. An alternative plan, which it said was inferior, was rejected. The cabinet also approved what are described as 5 principles for ending the war, which include establishing a post-war civilian government that is not Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. Well, this map shows in red areas of Gaza currently controlled by the Israeli military, which it says is 3/4 of the territory. A reminder that the new plan last night is for the military to take over Gaza City, where around 1 million Palestinians live. We are going to be live in Gaza City in the next few minutes. But a short while ago, the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, condemned the Israeli cabinet's plan.
This escalation by the Israeli government is going in total contradiction to the will of the international community, international law, and common sense, and I even dare to say against the wish of the majority of the people inside Israel as we read opinion polls.
And Riyad Mansour, speaking to journalists in New York, had said he was hoping for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. And in fact, breaking news, we have this now from our correspondent Neda Tawfik in New York. She says that the UN Security Council will indeed meet this weekend, Saturday, for an emergency meeting on Gaza. Every member of the UN Security Council, apart from the US and Panama, requested that urgent meeting following Israel's plan to take control of Gaza City. So that meeting due to happen tomorrow, Saturday, August the 9th, that emergency session of the UN Security Council. Well, these people in Gaza City have been giving their reaction to Israel's announcement.
Occupying Gaza is really dangerous. People here got exhausted because they have to displace every now and then. We can hardly provide food for our children. We no longer have the ability to leave from place to another. It's a really big problem. Some Palestinians were forced to displace more than 30 times.
These days in Gaza are the most difficult ones. The Strip is already exhausted, let alone being completely occupied. It's going to be totally disastrous, and it's going to be a death sentence to every Palestinian. I think the whole population in Gaza will be killed, either by bombardment or by hunger.
And let's cross now to our Gaza correspondent, Rushdie Abu-Alouf. Rushdie, tell us more about the response from Hamas to these latest developments. Hamas has been warning of what it calls fierce resistance, but does it have the capability to resist Israel's plan?
Well, I didn't think so, because we have seen recent Israeli military operation in Khan Yunis, Rafah, and everywhere, and we have seen little resistance from Hamas. Yes, we have seen Hamas still have some formation, some military squad that are active in some of the area, but not like before, not like when before 7th of October, when we used to be about 25 to 30,000 Hamas militants in Gaza. We believe that maybe 70% or maybe more of the Hamas capability to confront any possible Israeli, re-occupation of Gaza is declined and is destroyed by Israel in the last 22 months. And this is one of the arguments from many Palestinians in Gaza, saying what is left for Hamas, so Israel want to come and destroy it. Most of its capability to fight Israel. We haven't seen Hamas, for example, firing rockets towards Israel for a very, very long time. We have seen Israel like going into Deir al-Balah with a large force to different areas, and we haven't seen any single bullet from Hamas were fired towards the Israeli troops in the area. So people are suspicious about this.
We're going to be talking about the humanitarian situation in Gaza City in just a moment, Rushdie, but yesterday we saw a small flotilla of boats sail from Israel to the maritime border with Gaza, hostage families on board, and they, in their statement, appealed to Benjamin Netanyahu not to go ahead with this plan. They said it would mean that their loved ones were going to be moved or killed. What might this mean for Hamas's approach to the surviving hostages held in Gaza?
Well, Hamas is trying to maximize the public pressure on Mr. Netanyahu by saying that any possible Israeli operation in Gaza will put the lives of the hostages at risk. And we have seen in the past when Israel tried to, free the hostages by force, Hamas have killed 4 of them, or Israel said that Hamas have killed 4 of them. And we might see this again, because there was a statement from Al-Qassam Brigade, the military wing of Hamas, about 5-6 months ago, and they said they have ordered all the people who are accompanying and securing the hostages that to kill them if Israel is trying to release them by force. Hamas said the only way to release them is by negotiation, and so far Hamas accused Israel of, especially the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, of backtrack in his negotiation process and prefer the military action over the peace talks in Doha. Hamas always try to put pressure on Netanyahu by trying to, show propaganda videos for the hostages. Quite recently, we have seen Israeli hostage trying to dig his grave. It was very painful for the family of the Israeli hostages. This is Hamas trying all the time to put this kind of pressure in Israel.
Rushdie, thank you very much. Rushdie Abu-Alouf, our Gaza correspondent there. Well, let's go live now to Gaza City itself, and we can speak to Amjad Al-Shawa, director of the Palestinian NGO Network. Amjad, thank you very much for joining us on BBC News. And I wonder, describe for us the mood there in Gaza City since this announcement by Israel.
Thank you. This exhausted, tired Gazans now is more and more scared of the coming military operation that declared by Netanyahu and his cabinet. And just to think about a new displacement, collective displacement from Gaza to the south, and to assure you, there is no safe area at all in Gaza Strip. All the areas in the Gaza Strip under bombardment. And recently in Gaza, I have to tell that about 60% of Gaza under the evacuation orders. We have 1,100,000 people who are staying in about 28 kilometers only, in very complicated humanitarian situation, which is extremely deteriorated. We have the starvation, thirst, diseases, the collapse of the humanitarian and health system in Gaza. And whilst we are suffering like that, we have such decision to come to threaten the Palestinians, And so many people cannot access to go to the south. We're talking about elders, people, disability patients, injured, orphans, tens of thousands of orphans, widows who cannot move or be displaced on the south. And from the 2nd of March till now, since the closure of all the crossings, no shelter items, no tents, nothing enter Gaza. I know thousands of people who has no tents, just lying on the streets and the spaces in very critical
as you say, Amjad, some people will not have the ability to move. For those who could move, who are trying to decide what to do, whether to try to stay or to go, give us a sense of what people are thinking about that.
Till the last second, people are insisting to stay. And for these people, this is not the first forcible displacement order in Gaza. I know so many people who insisted to stay, patients who cannot move, and they were killed. And part of them, 7 of my relatives, elders, who couldn't move, and they have no one to stay with them. Their home were airstriken by the Israelis, and the 7 of them were killed. And this example could be copied in other families. So this is one of the things which scared us, or Israel, to impose kind of new blockade on the Gaza city to deny the entry of basic food supplies or humanitarian aid needs to the Gaza city. No medications, no water, no food, in order to push the Palestinians to move to the south. It's not the meaning that the south in better conditions. Also people are there starving, and there is no space on the south, in the middle area or in the Mawasi area, where is 1.1 million also who are staying in the Mawasi in very critical moments, suffering from shortage and run out of everything almost. So Amjad, it's very critical.
Amjad, thank you very much for talking to us. Amjad Al-Shawa there in Gaza City, director of the Palestinian NGO Network. Well, in Israel, the group representing hostage families described Benjamin Netanyahu's move as a colossal catastrophe, which only endangers further, they said, those still held in Gaza's tunnels.
You failed. My Matan is still there, instead of doing the one thing that this government hasn't done, putting a comprehensive deal on the table that will bring all 50 of them home together.
Well, let's speak now to Doran Kempel, former Deputy Commander of an IDF Special Operations Unit. Thank you very much for joining us on BBC News as well today. I think a lot of people will have heard and seen the head of the army very publicly making clear his opposition to this plan on the grounds of objections and concerns about the impact on hostages, on Palestinians, and indeed on Israeli soldiers themselves. Operationally, how challenging will it be for the Israeli army to carry out the sort of operation that the government has instructed them to do?
Thank you for having me, Anita. It's going to be extremely difficult, and in the short term, everybody in the field, the Palestinians, the hostages, IDF, and Hamas will suffer. So in the short term, this is an extension of the tragedy that has been unfolding for almost 2 years right now. The military is going to move very slowly in order to secure its personnel. That's their duty. At the same time, they'll try to move quickly to where the hostages are. I'm not familiar with the plans. I'm not familiar with the intelligence. I'm just thinking hypothetically how this will unfold, but this is not going to be a delicate operation.
And you say they will move, you believe they will move very quickly to where they believe the hostages are held, presumably because they know the longer this operation continues, the greater the risk to the hostages, which is already very high, obviously.
Yes, but in order to move quickly, you need to have the right intelligence. I'm not familiar with what the intelligence picture is, so I can't comment on that. But conceptually, the military needs to move very slowly in order to reduce the harm to its own personnel and to other civilians. At the same time, in order to rescue the hostages, you need to move very quickly, but you need intelligence in order to do that.
Is this going to require a large-scale mobilization? I spoke just a couple of days ago to an IDF reservist who is refusing to serve in Gaza at this time. He thinks the war at this point, the conflict at this point, is wrong.
I understand. I think that your question was regarding the scale of the mobilization?
Yes, will there need to be a big mobilization of reservists and others potentially in order to carry out this operation as designated by the cabinet?
Right. The question is whether the strategic intention is to close off the area and not allow anybody out. That will require a large-scale operation. But if the strategic intention is just to conquer, to capture certain locations, and you're willing to allow some basically porous, or you're allowing some people to escape, I'm referring to Hamas combatants, then you need a smaller force.
Okay, Doran Kemple, former Deputy Commander of an IDF Special Operations Unit. Thank you very much for your insight into that.
Thank you.
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to take over Gaza City has prompted criticism from international leaders. Germany says it's suspending military exports to Israel. Germany is the second biggest exporter of arms to Israel after the United States. Here in the UK, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer called the decision to further escalate the offensive in Gaza wrong and said it will only bring more bloodshed. He's urging Israel to reconsider. Saudi Arabia issued this statement saying it categorically denounces what it calls the Israeli occupation authorities' persistence in committing crimes of starvation, brutal practices and ethnic cleansing against the brotherly Palestinian people. And China's foreign ministry says Gaza belongs to the Palestinian people and is an inseparable part of Palestinian territory. China is calling for an immediate ceasefire. Well, let's go live now to Jerusalem and speak to our international editor, Jeremy Bowen. Jeremy, thank you for joining us on a really big day, in one of many big days, as this conflict continues. I think it's worth beginning with the question, why is Benjamin Netanyahu going ahead with this plan? There are lots of calls for him to rethink it, as we've been explaining. Why is he going ahead with it when he has had this very public opposition from the Army Chief of Staff and also consistent public opinion polls saying the Israeli public do not want this conflict to escalate?
Well, a lot of it is guesswork, but it may well go back to the internal political issues here, which have many people here, Israelis, assume that he has actually motivated him to prolong the war. And a couple of weeks ago, people were speculating that once the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, started their summer holiday, and they have now, and therefore he wouldn't be subject to a vote of confidence, which would topple his government, that he might even decide to go for a ceasefire, that he might take up the promises offered by the opposition to back him in that, knowing that when the parliament came back in October, they would be in, there would probably be a vote against him, and then there would be a couple of months before an election. But the fact that now he's gone ahead with this, hardline plan, which the army is against, the opposition is against, which many Israelis are against, apart from any of the comments coming from abroad and coming from the Palestinians, suggests that perhaps he wants to prolong the period of trying to deal with the hard right-wing members of his government who keep him in power, trying to keep them happy after they come back in October. So therefore, continuing to avoid a vote of confidence, continuing to avoid an early election, and also, of course, continuing to avoid having to really have to concentrate judicially on his very long-running trial for corruption, which, while the war goes on, is very much going at super slow pace.
And where does all of this leave the prospect of a ceasefire, or even meaningful ceasefire negotiations, or has that all gone, Jeremy?
Well, never say never on anything in this, and also don't predict a ceasefire till you actually see it happening and written down. I think that's I think that's one lesson we've learned in the last 22 months. There is a period of about 2 months now, they're saying, before the army gets into position to do this operation, coinciding with the second anniversary of the Hamas attacks on 7th of October 2023. So in that 2 months, perhaps a lot of other things can happen. In his political career, Benjamin Netanyahu has been renowned as somebody who uses the tactic of playing for time to try to, first of all, disarm his critics and his opponents, and also to try and generate a few more options to keep things going, keep the balls in the air. So perhaps that's what he's thinking and hoping for. But I think a lot of the thinking behind this does come back to this idea that he is determined to prolong the war, as you've said yourself, at a time when polls show consistently that a majority of Israelis would rather have a deal that gets the hostages back, dead and alive, than prolonging the war, which will lead to something they don't want, which is more deaths of Israeli soldiers, and something the outside world and the Palestinians certainly don't want, which is more mass casualties in a very small part of the world, in the Gaza Strip, where there is already a massive humanitarian crisis, great hunger, and in some cases starvation, people dying of hunger.
Criticism from the Saudis, Jeremy. I mentioned that specifically because we know that that was the first place that Donald Trump went, both in his first term as president and his second term as president, for an international visit. He's been talking about big links, developing trade between the USA and the Saudis. Might the Saudis put pressure on Donald Trump or request Donald Trump to put pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu? Can anyone change the mind and the direction of Benjamin Netanyahu at the moment?
Well, I think the only person who can do it is Donald Trump. Would the Saudis ask him to have a word? They might. I don't think the Saudis will try and jeopardize their own trade links with the US, which are very important to them. And I think the de facto leader there, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, very much values his relationship with Donald Trump. But one thing that this absolutely puts completely, into the dim, distant future, if at all, frankly, is this dream of having some kind of a rapprochement between the Israelis and the Saudis. The Saudis are saying with, increasing consistency that nothing is going to happen on that file until first of all, the war ends, and also the humanitarian crisis ends, and also that there is concrete and irreversible progress towards a Palestinian state, the so-called two-state solution, which the Israeli government is adamantly opposed to.
Jeremy, thank you very much. Jeremy Bowen, our international editor in Jerusalem. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. Donald Trump's deadline for Russia to agree a ceasefire in Ukraine or face more sweeping sanctions expires today. The US president hasn't clarified whether he'll carry out his threat to penalize Moscow as well as its trading partners. The Kremlin said yesterday that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin would hold a summit in the coming days. Meanwhile, this was the scene in the city of Kharkiv overnight as Russian air and artillery attacks killed 3 people and injured 22 across Ukraine. Although Ukraine's Air Force has said Russia hasn't fired a single missile at cities since Wednesday, when Mr. Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff met President Putin in the Kremlin. Well, let's now go to Kyiv and speak to Konstantin Yelisiev, former Ukraine ambassador to NATO and the EU. Thank you very much for joining us on BBC News today. So there is still time for President Trump to impose those sanctions. Do you think he's going to?
I don't think so. Now everybody is talking about future US-Russia summit. But firstly, I would like to underline that nobody wants peace restored in Ukraine more than Ukraine does. We are fully committed to end the war, but not at any price. And President Trump has opened a window of opportunity, and we are very much grateful for that. That's why we are attentively following in Ukraine the possible, I would like to underline the possible, meeting between Trump and Putin. And believe me, the stakes are very high. But nobody shall be fooled by Putin again, because Putin's aim is unchanged. He would like to bring back Ukraine to the Russian sphere of influence. That's why the future summit, if it takes place, would be of highly importance not only for Ukraine, but for international community. And the idea of a summit with Trump is a Trump card. And let's hope that the White House fully understands that this meeting with Trump is not just an asset for Trump himself. But let me underline that this is also a ticket for Putin, a ticket back to the international stage, to go out from the isolation. That's why my message to you, we shall not play into Putin's hands.
Yeah, and some people would say, well, the US should be therefore going ahead with the sanctions because nothing has been agreed yet in order to show strength in these negotiations. We're just seeing this coming into as President Zelensky saying that Ukraine should be involved in any talks between Russia and the US. In his evening address to the nation, he said it is fair for Ukraine to be involved in negotiations. Therefore, the format for meetings between leaders is in particular a trilateral format. Obviously, this first one is going to be bilateral. Are you worried by that? Are you worried that something might be, or there may be an attempt to agree something without Ukraine in the room? Or do you think that President Trump will use this as a springboard for a trilateral meeting?
What's important is at any settlement, that this settlement must not come at the Ukraine's expense. That's why the key principle, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, should be maintained. Similarly, the principle, nothing about Europe's security without Europe, also must be maintained. Because in my view, the European Union plus United Kingdom should be involved in any future talks. But at the same time, in my view, you are talking about the sanctions against Russia. I don't think that these sanctions will change the Russian behavior. That's why, in my view, what could change the Russian behavior, this is, of course, more weapons to Ukraine and the signal to Moscow that the Moscow will be in a not in very secure position when Ukraine will receive, for example, long-haul rockets, missiles, in order to target Ukrainian territory, Russian territory.
Mr. Yelisiev, we must leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us on BBC News. Konstantin Yelisiev, former Ukraine ambassador to NATO and the EU. Do stay with us here on The World Today. Much more to come.